snap. The kick is in the air, and the kick this time is no, sir-ree. No, sir-ree. Final score, Tennessee 20, Florida 17. Pandemonium reigns.
You're listening to the RTI Podcast, powered by RockyTopInsider.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the RTI Podcast. I'm Nathaniel Rutherford, managing editor of RockyTopInsider.com, joined as always by my staff writer here at RTI, Ben McKee. He's also the co-host and producer of the Swain Event morning radio show. You hear that every single morning from 7 to 10 a.m. on Swain's app. Just search Swain Event in the App Store for Android and iPhone devices. And you can also find them on Swain Event TV on Periscope and Facebook Live as well. But guys, we're here for another episode of the podcast. We appreciate you tuning in for another episode here. You can find us similarly to where you can find Swain. We have, you can find us on, you can say iPhone or Android. We're in all the podcast apps there for Apple Podcasts and whatever podcast app you use for your Android device. RockyTopInsider.com, just click on the podcast tab there. You can listen to it straight from there. We also have a YouTube channel that we've been using for not just spring practice, or not just football highlights in the fall and interviews from players, but also for a different way to kind of engage with the podcast and leave some comments and stuff and, you know, have a conversation there. So trying to build a little more of a kind of a community thing with you guys. So we appreciate all of you who tune in, all of you who comment on our stuff, and all of you who interact with us. Ben, before we get to some football talk as far as on-field situations and on-field news and notes, there's some stuff that happened this weekend that we're just not getting into because we haven't had a chance to record until now. But obviously, it came out kind of early Sunday morning about Bryce Thompson, Tennessee sophomore quarterback, being charged with domestic assaults. And, of course, I think at this point all the listeners know kind of the whole situation, all the details of that. We won't rehash too much of it, but obviously you have him arguing with his girlfriend, who he's been in a relationship with for 4 years, he said. They both confirmed that to the officers on the scene there. Him yelling at her, they said, kind of a hearsay of him making threats to her. He denied it. I haven't seen what all she said, but there's just a lot of conjecture, and he said, she said about what was all being said. And there was the comment of Thompson allegedly saying that he was going to shoot up the school in anger. Thompson, from what I've gathered, at least from what he told police or what the reporter said, he doesn't own a firearm. So I think, Ben, my whole point in all this is I don't want to talk about a whole lot of the legal stuff. I am not a lawyer. Y'all had a really good job on Monday on Swain Event. You had Marcos Garza, who is one of the top lawyers in Knoxville, had him on the show, and I highly recommend anyone listening to this podcast go check that out. I think it was hour 2 of Swain's show on Monday when you guys had Marcos Garza on, and he did a very good job. Obviously, he's very well versed in everything that kind of went on with what happened over the weekend, but he's very well versed in a lot of the legal ramifications and aspects of kind of what's going on, why it was domestic abuse, why there was no citation for domestic violence. Kind of, he gave really good ins and outs of everything. So I highly recommend going and listening to that. I don't want to sit here and pretend like I'm a lawyer, but I do want to say, Ben, just before we get into football stuff, kind of touch on this a little bit. It came out Monday morning. The Tennessee released a statement that Jeremy Pruitt is suspending Thompson indefinitely, saying that we're going to gather all the facts. We very much value the safety of our student athletes and of our students in general at the University of Tennessee. So they're suspending him indefinitely as they gather information. He has a court date on September 3rd. I imagine after that court date comes and goes, we'll kind of probably get some more information, whether it's more suspension or a reduced suspension, or wherever it is. I think after that September 3rd date, we're going to get some more information. But at least initially, I think Tennessee has handled it appropriately at this point. I don't think based on what you've been told in the police reports and everything, I don't think the right call would have been to kick him off the team at this point. I don't think we know enough to just go ahead and make that kind of gut reaction to kick him off. I think suspending him indefinitely while you gather the information is the appropriate way. And I'm curious on your thoughts on it before we move on to some more football stuff.
No, I thought Jeremy Pruitt and Tennessee have handled it perfectly to this point. Obviously, it is not a good situation, an ideal situation. You laid everything out that has happened. He denies really saying what is reported, because let's be honest, he didn't lay his hands on the female, so there was no domestic violence. But yes, he should not have said what he said. But the big issue with everything that happened is what came out of his mouth, not his actions with the female, because he did not lay a hand on the female. The issue is, the whole shooting up the school and slapping the blank out of you towards the girl. Those are the issues. So there's obviously anger issues there for Bryce Thompson, and he's had previous incidents in high school, and that's why South Carolina did not recruit him. Will Muschamp made that decision, and unfortunately, if you're Bryce Thompson, all he did was make Will Muschamp look right and give something for South Carolina fans to clamor about. So the issue is with what he said right now, because again, he did not lay a hand on the female. No, there was no harm done to her. It was that she felt like she feared for her safety because of what he had said about slapping the blank out of her. And then the biggest issue with me is the whole shooting up the school. He says he did not say that word for word, but there were 4 witnesses there that said he did. So the only thing you can do if you're Tennessee is let the legal process play out. And even as fans and media members, that's all we can do, because we don't want to sit here and rush to judge Bryce Thompson for what he allegedly said when he may not have said it at all. If it turns out that he did say it, then there should be a strict punishment. I don't really know what that punishment is, because I am somebody who believes in second chances. I'm not a huge fan of condemning 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and saying that they don't deserve a second chance, because we've all made stupid mistakes. Obviously, I can't sit here and say I've ever said what Bryce Thompson allegedly said, but we've all made mistakes. So I'm for second chances. I'm not for condemning young men just because of one incident. And again, I know this isn't just one incident for Bryce Thompson, but I don't know what the punishment should be if it turns out that he did in fact say those exact words. But when that time comes, we'll talk about it. And for now, all you can do if you're Tennessee is just suspend him indefinitely, allow the legal system to play out, and just handle your business without Bryce Thompson. It sucks, but life goes on. The football season is still going to go on. Even once Bryce Thompson graduates from Tennessee football will still go on without him. And so that's how Tennessee has to operate these next couple of weeks with the season beginning.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And we'll have more coverage of this, as news develops. We'll keep you updated on RockyTopInsider.com. We'll talk about, of course, on podcasts and things like that. If anything drastic happens, if it announces, that he, for some reason is kicked off the team, we'll kind of do as much as we can of a live reaction stuff about Thompson. But hopefully for Tennessee's sake, and hopefully for his sake too, because I would hate to see him make the mistakes he made, and you have to pay for the mistakes you make. But I'd hate to see that result in that for him. But like you said, if the stuff is true, that what all was said and done, you would like to see him get help, however that goes about. But we'll cover that when it happens, or if it happens, or whatever does happen, we'll have coverage of everything that happens with Bryce Thompson on RockyTopInsider.com. Ben, to move on to some on-the-field stuff, Tennessee plays a game this weekend, and it's like you said, this was kind of just even worse timing because of when this happened, because Tennessee is less than a week away from kicking off the season. And while they won't need Bryce Thompson when they play Georgia State, and they may not really need him when they play BYU either, you would still like to have him out there in at least one game before you go into the SEC slate when you play Florida in September. So it was very, very bad timing, and just very bad situation all around for Thompson. But for the rest of the team, Tennessee is getting ready to play Georgia State on Saturday, kickoff at 3:30. We'll kind of break down a little bit more of that game, maybe not necessarily an in-depth opponent breakdown on the next podcast later this week, because it's Georgia State. They went 2-10 last year. Tennessee should pretty much be able to beat them pretty easily. But we'll talk about things we want to see from the game, from specific units, from specific players, and maybe from the coaches and stuff too. But Ben, on Monday, Tennessee released their official Week 1 depth chart. We have the first depth chart of the season. There were some things that were not surprising. You have Jarrett Garantano listed as the true starter at quarterback, Marquez Callaway, Josh Palmer, Juwan Jennings, Dominic Wood Anderson as your quintet of the starters in the pass catching core. Ty Chandler listed as the undoubted starter at running back, which I guess was a little surprising to me, but not severely. Kind of the big headline that came from the depth chart was all of the oars and almost all of the oars came from the offensive line and defensive line, where you had no true starters named at either any position on the offensive line or any position on the defensive line. All of them were co-starters. In one case on the defensive line, you had 4 guys listed as a co-starter with Matthew Butler, Aubrey Solomon, Latrell Bumpus, and Savion Williams, all listed as co-starters at one position on the defensive line. So that was kind of fun. You also had, like I said, on the offensive line, all 5 positions listed as co-starters. At the Jack linebacker, you had DeAndre Johnson and Kevon Bennett listed as co-starters. Middle linebacker, Daniel Batuli and Will Ignott. That's mostly because of Batuli's kind of, the minor knee procedure he had a little while ago that's going to keep him out potentially for this weekend's game. I think that's the only reason why you saw him listed as a co-starter with Will Ignott. At weak side linebacker, Henry To'oTo'o and Shannon Reed listed as co-starters. And at the other cornerback spot, Bryce Thompson was not on the depth chart, which was not surprising. But at the cornerback spot where he would have been starting, you have Warren Burrell, the true freshman, or Sean Schamberger, the junior, listed as the co-starters there. You also have co-stars listed at punter with Joe Doyle and Paxton Brooks currently. Ben, looking at, I don't want to go through and kind of break down the entire depth chart. You can go to their website, RockyTopInsider.com, and you can find that there. You can just search depth chart, and it should be the first thing that pops up. But I want to talk about a couple of surprises. One of the biggest surprises for you, one of the biggest surprises for me from the depth chart and when it was released, because I look at one of the things that stood out to me immediately. Maybe this was just an error on the SID's part, and maybe they forgot to switch them up in the names, but whatever it was surprising to me to see Jeremy Banks listed as the third-string running back and not listed as linebacker, even though he switched back to linebacker last weekend. And by all accounts, it seems like true freshman Eric Gray is the third-string running back. So maybe that was just like I said, a clerical error. Someone kind of forgot to move him over to linebacker or whatever it was. But that one was a little surprising to me. One that I've seen a lot of people say it's been kind of a surprise, but if they had been reading, if they've been paying attention to your practice reports, they've been paying attention to what we've said on here and different things, I was not surprised by it because of what you told me, what you've seen for practice. But Jacquez Jones was in the 2 deep at 2 different receiver positions. He was listed, or at least one of them actually. I can't tell if I let me go back and check the actual depth chart here, but he was definitely listed as one of the main backups behind Juwan Jennings at that slot position. You have Brandon Johnson listed as kind of the main guy behind him, but Jacquez Jones is right there. I thought that was that wasn't as surprising to me because, like I said, I've been talking with you and you've been telling me he's been challenging Jordan Murphy all fall for that kind of backup slot receiver spot, and it surprised some people, I think, to not see Jordan Murphy on the 2 deep, and I think it was a little surprising that he wasn't on the 2 deep, but it didn't surprise me to see Jacquez Jones listed out there. And I think one of the other surprises for me, at least on offense, was not seeing any of the true freshman tight ends. And you had 5 guys listed at tight end, and you didn't have Jackson Lowe or Sean Brown listed at all there. But even still, that didn't surprise me a ton because, from what you've said, Ben, from what you've been watching the tight ends, it's just been Dominic Wood-Anderson and then a bunch of guys. And I know, and it doesn't surprise me that Jeremy Pruitt didn't put any of the true freshmen there because I do think you make a case that Pope and Craig will get more playing time, at least early on. Princeton Fant is going to be your blocking guy, so he kind of deserves a spot in that depth chart. And then Jacob Warren has been here for a year and is probably a better pass catcher than Lowe or Brown, and I think he could be used more in the offense than Lowe or Brown, at least early on. So it didn't surprise me a ton. I really think the biggest surprise I had was Jeremy Banks still being on the running back depth chart, but I think that, like I said, could just been a mistake by whoever made the depth chart. So I'm curious if you had anything else that was kind of a big surprise to you on defense, offense, or anything else in the depth chart.
Yeah, you pretty much hit on all the ones that surprised me. I'm not putting stock into Jeremy Banks being listed as a running back. I think that was just a clerical error, especially because Eric Gray is not the 4th-team running back. I can promise you that, if anything, he could be viewed as a co-starter. I think he is going to receive as many reps as Ty Chandler and Tim Jordan, whether that comes as a pass catcher or as a runner. Eric Gray is going to play a lot of football, and he's even listed at punt returner as well. I believe he's 3rd behind Callaway and help me out. If I don't know if you have the depth chart right in front of you.
Yeah, you're talking about Cedric Tillman?
Punt return.
Oh, punt returner. Sorry, I was looking at receiver. Yeah, punt returner, you have... Well, punt returner, it's just Callaway, but a kick returner, you have Chandler, Callaway, and then you have Warrior and Gray. Yeah.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Kick returner, not punt returner. So,
yeah, you're good.
Gray is going to play a lot of football is my overall point. So I'm not putting a lot of stock into Jeremy Banks being listed as a running back. I think that was just a clerical error. Maybe he was, or maybe that depth chart was put together before Jeremy Banks even made the move to inside linebacker. So that I'm not putting a lot of stock into that. I was a little bit surprised to see the two, or not see the two freshman tight ends like you mentioned, although the guys that were listed on the depth chart have been the guys receiving reps at tight end, whereas those guys have been towards the back of the line. So is it surprising that they're not already on the depth chart by now since they arrived on campus? Yes. Is it surprising based off of what we have seen this fall camp? No. And I guess the other big one to me that you did not mention was Gerard Means being listed as the backup corner to Alontae Taylor. And it's not that it's a surprise in the sense of I didn't see it coming, because I did see it coming. There's literally nobody else to back up Warren Burrell and Alontae Taylor in the absence of Bryce Thompson. I know a lot of people keep saying Sean Schamberger. Well, I view Sean Schamberger as a starter because he's going to be the nickel. He's going to be that star position, and he's going to be on the football field a ton. So could he slide over and play the corner? Absolutely. But I view him as a starter at essentially a different position, the nickel and the star, as I just mentioned. And so you're left with Gerard Means, and that's about it. I mean, listen, the Tennessee is struggling at depth at corner, and so it's not that Gerard Means being at corner surprises me. It's just I had a shocking moment, just a come to Jesus meeting with myself when I saw Gerard Means listed as the backup corner. That instilled some fear into me. So will it hurt Tennessee against Georgia State? No. It'll be great for Gerard Means to get out there and get some reps at the position, but it does worry me against BYU. It does worry me against Florida. I don't know whether Gerard Means is capable of being productive or not. We will see. If there's a position on this roster that I am going to trust to be ready, it's going to be the secondary because of Derek Ansley, because of Jeremy Pruitt. I think he will be ready, but he's still a true freshman. And, BYU doesn't have the firepower of the Florida wide receiver room, but they are a veteran unit who has played a lot of college football. They're older guys, and it'll be Gerard Means' just second ever college football game. So it wasn't that he was at the backup spot that surprised me. It's just I just had a realization in that moment when I saw, like, wow, Gerard Means is the backup corner, and I don't think that's a great spot to be in going into the season.
Yeah, we've talked about it here before. I think it was not long after the Bailey Buchanan stuff was mentioned by Pruitt about him having the narrowing of the spine and stuff. Tennessee is now with Bryce Thompson being suspended indefinitely. That further compounds just how thin Tennessee really is at cornerback. They have quite a bit of defensive backs on the roster, but a lot of those guys are safety and kind of star position guys. You don't have actually a lot of cornerbacks on this roster. You have Alontae Taylor, you have Warren Burrell, who are both going to be starting. You have Sean Schamberger, who can kind of play a few different positions. He's been safety, he's been star, he's been nickel. I mean, he can play a little bit of I don't want to say a little bit of everything, but he can play a little bit of 2-3 different positions in the secondary. You also have Gerard Means, who you were just talking about, as a true freshman up there. And Kenny Solomon. I mean, he's also a true freshman, and ideally you're not wanting to play him this year at all. Terrell Bailey, I think he's still a cornerback, but he hasn't really done a whole lot while he's been at Tennessee. And then you have Kenneth George Jr., who I think will be not a bad backup option, but I don't think he's really going to play. You ideally wouldn't want to see him play a ton. He's listed as the second option, or I guess technically the third option behind Burrell and Schamberger at the second cornerback spot. So I'd imagine he's kind of the next guy in at either nickel or the second corner spot. And like you said, Means is listed behind Taylor. But I mean, you have of the guys that weren't listed on the depth chart, you have Terrell Bailey and Kenny Solomon. I mean, that's it. That's everyone else you have a defensive back as a safety or they don't feel comfortable enough to put out there out on the corner, out on the outside as one of the two main cornerback spots. And maybe you have someone else you can put at nickel who is listed maybe with the safety position or something like that. But I mean, that's why you see Ben. That's why people are saying, why are they recruiting all these cornerbacks in this class when you have two really good guys with two really good young guys with Taylor and Thompson? It's because you don't have any depth. That's why they're recruiting guys like Keyshawn Lawrence, who they're wanting to see at cornerback. He's listed as a safety and some recruiting services, but it's likely he's going to start out at cornerback at Tennessee. That's why you also have Art Green, the number 2 junior college prospect in the country, the number 1 junior college cornerback in the country, committed to Tennessee. That's why you have I'm just blanking on other game. Lovey, whatever his name is, the other guy. I'm just blanking on his name for some reason, but the other guy they have committed in this class, who is a cornerback for Tennessee in the 2020 class. I mean, that's why you're seeing them go after several cornerbacks. That's why I would be a little surprised, I guess, if they took another corner in this class, but at the same time, it wouldn't shock me, really. It would surprise me a little bit, but it wouldn't be the biggest shock in the world. There's just not a lot of cornerback depth. There's a lot of areas, Ben, that, and you'd agree with me, and everyone listening would agree with me, there are a lot of areas you can point to and say, Tennessee does not have good depth there. That's still because they're in a rebuild. They're only in the second year of Jeremy Pruitt. You still don't have ideal depth at a lot of positions. You don't have ideal depth at quarterback. You have, in my opinion, a pretty good starter, but you have two guys who have never taken a snap behind him, and they're not experienced. They're a second-year guy and a first-year guy. So you don't have a lot of depth there. You don't really have a lot of depth. I guess you have depth on defensive line. You just don't know what you have there. You don't really have a lot of depth on outside linebacker. You have more depth on the inside than you do on the outside. This team just, they're not there from depth perspective. I think from a starter perspective, from the starting 22, it's a pretty good team. That's a team that you look at the starting 22 and say, hey, they should be able to contend and win some games. When you start going deeper into too deep, you're saying, oh, well, if they get an injury here, if they get an injury there, that could be really bad news for this team. So this depth chart to me has a lot of intriguing parts of it, has a lot of just interesting things to note, but also it just kind of showed to me, hey, that Tennessee's still struggling in the depth department in a lot of areas. One thing I wanted to discuss here, Ben, in this episode of the podcast, taking a little bit of a deeper dive into the depth chart here, looking at both the lines of scrimmage, the offensive line and defensive line. I asked you, got pretty heavy input from you when I was doing my depth chart projections, at the end of last week, post fall camp, and it was kind of projecting what maybe the first week depth chart would look like for Tennessee. I asked, pretty heavily lean pretty heavily on you for kind of the offensive line stuff, because obviously you pay attention to the offense quite a bit at practice and have been keeping up with kind of who they're rotating in and out at different positions and who's getting, looks like it's getting more first team reps at different positions on the offensive line. 10 different guys listed as co-starters on the offensive line. I'm curious, Ben, if you had to pick right now, and this, I'm also calling for you to make a prediction on Trey Smith's health too. So if you had to make a prediction right now, who do you think ends up being the starting 5 on the offensive line? Because I look at it and I think there are 3 guys I feel fairly confident in picking as ranging from very confident to fairly confident in picking as starters. But really, it's the interior. It's the 2 guard spots I don't feel great about. And that, if Trey Smith's cleared to play, obviously I feel great about one of those. But I think, to me, it's going to be interesting to see who ends up starting when Tennessee goes out on offense on Saturday. And then if by next week, when they play BYU, if that's going to be the same starting 5 or not. So if you had to pick right now, who do you think Tennessee's starting 5 on the O-line is?
That's a good question, and you're basically putting a gun to my head. So next time I am going to hurt you for this. I'm just kidding. I know Brandon Kennedy is going to start at center, and then outside of that is a whole lot of I think, because they are cross training so much. They are sliding guys around so much, using so many different combinations, and Tennessee is saying, oh, it's because we want to play 8 to 10 guys, and it's good to have them cross-trained, and I 100% agree that it is good to have them cross-trained because you never know what may happen. But I also think it's because nobody has stepped up and solidified a role along the offensive line. So I'll say Brandon Kennedy plays center. I will pencil in Trey Smith at left guard until proven otherwise. At left tackle, I'll say Wanye Morris gets the nod. At right guard,
That's the tough one. That's one I struggle with the most. Is right guard.
Yeah, that's because there's three guys at that position battling. Riley Locklear, Kayron Calvert, and Jerome Carvin. I'll give Riley Locklear the nod. It seems like I've heard his name generate a little more buzz consistently throughout this fall camp. And then at right tackle, I think Marcus Tatum will get the nod to begin with. And then at some point, Darnell Wright will enter the lineup. I could also see a situation where Marcus Tatum starts at left tackle and Darnell starts at right tackle. I could see a situation to where Jameer Johnson starts at left tackle instead of Wanye. Obviously, Carvin or Kayron Calvert could start at right guard over Riley Locklear, but I think Locklear will earn that job. And then I'll say Ryan Johnson is the first person off the bench. He is the sixth man. He is the Lamonte Turner of the offensive line in the sense of if somebody's struggling and needs to be pulled, he's going into whatever position they play, or if somebody gets hurt, he's going in and playing whatever position the player who just got hurt plays. And I'll say that if Trey Smith does not play, I think Ryan Johnson starts at left guard.
I would, that's pretty spot on what my thoughts on it too. I think you have obviously Brandon Kennedy at center. I would be pretty stunned if Brandon Kennedy is not your starting center week one for Tennessee. I would, if it's Jerome Carvin, that's tells me something about Brandon Kennedy's health that we all weren't anticipating here. I think Marcus Tatum will be at right tackle. I think there's a chance he plays at left tackle, but if he, I still think it's going to be right tackle. He's listed as a co-starter at right tackle. Then you have Wanye and Jameer Johnson as left tackle guys, so I'm pretty sure it'll be Tatum at right tackle. And I'm pretty sure actually it'll be Wanye Morris at left tackle. I don't think Jameer Johnson's going to start left tackle. I think he's going to be a guy that was pretty much a full-time starter last year for Tennessee, who I don't know if unless there's injury or something, I don't know if he's going to be able to crack the starting lineup this year, which that to me shows, Tennessee does have improved depth, at least on the offensive line, as far as, like I said, these true freshmen coming in, Darnell Wright and Wanye Morris, immediately coming in and contending with a guy who started, I think, 11 of Tennessee's 12 games last year, who was, he was definitely an undersized guard last year, and he's still undersized, I think. He's a guy that you would still like to be in the program, for a strength and conditioning program for another year to put on some more good weight. But I think Wanye Morris is starting at left tackle. I think Kennedy at center. I think Tatum at right tackle. And obviously if Trey Smith is healthy, he's going to be at left guard. I think Riley Locklear will start at the other guard position if Trey Smith is not healthy. Or excuse me, Trey Smith is healthy. If Smith isn't healthy, I think Locklear will remain that left guard spot. And then, Ben, like you said, I think Ryan Johnson will be at right guard. And I think Ryan Johnson is probably the first off the bench at any position, even if it's one of the tackle spots. I think he might be first off the bench if a guy is struggling or something, because he's been practicing, as you said, all 5 positions at offensive line he's been practicing. So it wouldn't shock me to see him kind of be the first guy off there. But I also, you mentioned to me when I was doing the depth chart projections, Darnell Wright is a guy you would to watch at guard as well, because he's been getting a lot of rep at guard, not just at tackle. So I think Darnell Wright and Ryan Johnson are to me 2 of the more intriguing guys on the offensive line as far as their position versatility, just maybe their overall ceiling and what they can have. I think Johnson, I'm not sure about his ceiling being as high. Obviously it's not as high as Darnell Wright's. But I like Johnson as a guy who seems very smart. Ben, you and I both have talked with him in different media settings. He is a very intelligent young man, very smart. He talked about, I think last year, a complicated math situation and likened it to playing offensive line. He's just a very smart guy, and I think he's a guy who you'd feel comfortable enough, like they did last year, running at center, because he's cerebral enough to be that guy who has to kind of be the quarterback of the offensive line. So he's a guy to me that'll play quite a bit, even though he may not be a starter, at least initially. And I also think Darnell Wright will play quite a bit, even though he may not be a starter initially. Maybe Darnell Wright does leap over Marcus Tatum here the next couple of days before week 1, but I don't think you'll see Wright starting and for another couple weeks at least. I think you'll see Tatum manning things down. And I think if Tatum doesn't do well against Florida, that could be the turning point. But we'll see. We saw Florida's front 7 have an absolute field day against some very younger offensive linemen against Miami, but that was in week 1. Tennessee, Morris and Wright should have, they will have 3 weeks and should be able to get more acclimated to college football before they play Florida But man, I think that game has to give Tennessee's coaches just a little pause, seeing what happened with Miami over the weekend. Similarly, Ben, on the defensive line, I'm not going to ask you for the starters because I don't think, even if whoever starts for Tennessee on the defensive line, when the defense first takes the field, just because they're starting doesn't mean they're going to end up playing the most snaps. I think with the offensive line, you obviously want to have 5 guys who play the majority of the snaps because you want to have that chemistry and those guys, figure things out and kind of, having we've said multiple times, that's the unit that chemistry is the most important. The defensive line, you can rotate guys in and out. You can have like 3 guys starting and then on the next series have 3 different guys out there and get different or better results from all of them. So if I'm not asking if you're the 3 starters, I'm just asking you if you kind of had to choose, what 3 to 4 guys do you think play the most on Saturday? Because once again, this is kind of contingent on R.A. Solomon, whether or not he gets cleared. And if he gets cleared or doesn't get cleared, we may do kind of a reaction podcast as immediately as he can to that one whenever the news happens. But I look at the defensive line. I think Greg Emerson's going to be the guy that gets the most play at nose tackle. I think you're going to see Latrell Bumpus get quite a bit of snaps, and Matthew Butler. And then R.A. Solomon will be my next one if he's eligible. If he's not eligible, I'm torn between really 3 guys: Darrell Middleton, John Mincy, and Savion Williams. But I do think if R.A. Solomon's cleared, I think it's pretty easy to me for the 4 I would pick would be Greg Emerson, maybe not even in this order, but Greg Emerson, Matthew Butler, Latrell Bumpus, and R.A. Solomon. But if he's not cleared, that to me it really kind of makes you wonder who else is going to get more. And I think a lot of these guys are going to get snaps. They have 3, 6. They have 11 guys, or excuse me, 10 guys listed on the defensive line. That's all 10 guys. I mean, I think it's all the scholarship guys I have on the defensive line right now that have listed in the 3 deep on the depth chart. I think all those guys will get play, but Ben, I'm curious which kind of 3 to 4 you think are more in line to get kind of the most snaps against Georgia State.
No, I'm on the same page as you, and I think the leader in the clubhouse is R.A. Solomon, and if you're Tennessee, you are praying and you are hoping that he is going to be eligible. You've already lost Emmett Gooden for the year. He was slated to start this year. He and R.A. Solomon, they're not necessarily head and shoulders above everybody else, but you can tell that they are the best defensive linemen that Tennessee has to offer right now. So you've already suffered a huge blow with Emmett Gooden. You can't afford that with R.A. Solomon as well. And unfortunately, it seems like that is out of Tennessee's hands. Who knows if Jim Harbaugh is playing a major role in it or not. I think where there is smoke, there is fire. And I guess you could say it. I'm accusing him of not doing enough to help R.A. Solomon become eligible. We have talked about it a ton on the Swain event, as has everybody in Knoxville. So no need to rehash that. But R.A. Solomon is number 1, assuming he is eligible. Number 2, I would say it's like 2A and 2B for me is Greg Emerson and Matthew Butler. Those guys have generated, not a Eric Gray or Warren Burrell type buzz throughout fall camp, but they have consistently been consistent, if that makes sense. I mean, they are just consistently going with the first team. They're consistently doing what the coaches ask them to do. They're consistently where they are supposed to be. So I think those are the 2 guys after R.A. Solomon. And then you look at guys like Jaquan Blakely and Latrell Bumpus, who are veterans but who have played multiple positions. I think they will receive a lot of playing time on Saturday against Georgia State. And if they perform well, I think you'll see them quite a bit against BYU next Saturday. And then you got to throw the newcomers in there as well. They will obviously be thrown into the fire. Darrell Middleton, you mentioned him. Savion Williams, I think they'll be thrown into the fire, and they'll either sink or they'll swim, and that will determine their playing time for the next month or so. And then, John Mincy has been around. There's just a bunch of names of guys who haven't proven anything, but the 4 guys that stick out above the rest, and again, they're not head and shoulders above the rest, but they definitely stick out more. It's Greg Emerson, Matthew Butler, R.A. Solomon, and then I'd say Latrell Bumpus.
Yeah, I think that's like I said, it's going to be kind of I want to say kind of open door, closed door, a rotating door of the guys coming in and out for the defensive line against Georgia State. But you're going to see a lot of guys play, maybe more guys play against Georgia State than you do any other game this year. That's including the UTC game that's going to be here in a couple weeks too, after the BYU game, because maybe that game you see more because it's after BYU and then it's before Florida. But I do genuinely believe you're going to see maybe all 10 guys who are listed. Like I said, that's assuming Arbor Solomon's cleared. But I think if he's cleared, I think you're going to see all 10 guys listed on the depth chart, and that's all 10. Like I said, all 10 scholarship players Tennessee has on the defensive line who can play, because Emmett Gooden obviously cannot play. But I think you're going to see all of them. It would not shock me at all if you saw every single one of Tennessee's defensive linemen register at least a couple snaps on Saturday against Georgia State. And I don't think you'll obviously see as many offensive linemen play, but I think you will see probably a ton of defensive players in general play, because I think aside from really on defense, Ben, aside from Daniel Batuli, who may not even play, Darrell Taylor and Nigel Warrior and Alontae Taylor, I mean, you don't know what you have from a lot of the guys on defense. I mean, those are the guys I would circle and say, hey, you know what you're getting from these guys. Everyone else, I mean, Trevon Flowers, I think he has a really high ceiling, but he missed a lot last season with injury. I think they want to see what he can do when healthy and kind of get him more acclimated, get back acclimated to playing on the actual football field. You don't know what you have for Warren Bureau for sure. He's a true freshman. Sean Chambers shown a little bit, but even as a junior, he hasn't played as much as maybe you would like. Henry To'oTo'o is a true freshman. Shannon Reed hasn't played a whole lot. Will Ignott's played a decent amount, but even still, there's just a lot of guys on that defense that I think you're just going to see a ton of defensive players see the field against Georgia State. I mean, you have the starting 11. I think you'll probably see another 13, 14 defensive players play that aren't the starters for Tennessee and against Georgia State, and then maybe even more than that. So I think it's going to be a very interesting game. We'll kind of talk about what we want to see from that game later on this week in the second podcast here. But if you guys have any questions about Georgia State, about what we want to see from the game, let us know. We'll answer them in the podcast later this week. I'll be asking for questions for our weekly mailbag probably later today. This podcast will be coming out on Tuesday afternoon, so probably later today, kind of tonight, I'll post on Twitter for questions for our weekly mailbag, for the season, anything you want to ask about recruiting, men's basketball or football, either one, and that one, or if you have any questions about the Bryce Thompson situation, we'll answer it, as well as we can without, keep in mind, we're not lawyers, we don't want to be lawyers, we got into sports media for a reason, but we'll answer any questions you have kind of as best as we can with the information we have available for anything. So be asking for questions for mailbag. We'll ask for questions too, maybe for the podcast later this week, but we'll definitely kind of break down a little bit of Georgia State and also talk about what we want to see from the game, or what we want to see from Tennessee and specific units and players. And Ben's going to have an opponent preview about Georgia State probably on Wednesday. If not Wednesday, it'll be Thursday, but sometime this week, kind of midweek, it's going to have an opponent preview looking at this is what you did about Georgia State. They do return a lot of guys from last year. Pruitt kind of highlighted that in his Monday press conference, but they're still a team that Tennessee should, you'd imagine, been beat by 20, 30 points or so on Saturday. But we'll get to that when we get to it the next podcast a little bit later this week. We appreciate you all tuning in to this episode. Until next time, this has been another episode of the RTI Podcast.